Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Greg Miller, our host. And Greg, we have decided to feature a legacy podcast today featuring both Mark and Debbie Laaser.
Yes, and the topic today is Deb's going to be addressing some things that wives need from their husbands early in recovery. So these are 10 things that are helpful for wives, especially in the early days of recovery. Can also be true for later, but in the early days, these are really important.
We hope that you'll enjoy this podcast.
Today we have a special guest, and that is Debbie, my wife. So we've been talking to her for a while about being on the show, and so she's here. Welcome to the Men of Valor program.
Thanks, hon. I love being here with you all.
Well, we also know that while we call it the Men of Valor program, there's a lot of the wives that are listening, and a lot of our couples are listening together as couples. So this will be good today, that we're going to talk about some kind of basic things that a wife needs in the early days of the recovery journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we should start by just saying, we're real believers here that we can be most helpful to this whole process when we have both a husband and a wife involved. And so for many people, there may not be that belief that if someone has an addiction problem, the job is for that person to get well and then everything will be fine in the relationship. But we definitely experience that when we have both people involved in the process, there is so much growth and transformation, not only for each of them individually, but for them as a couple.
Right.
So, not only from my own journey, but working with so many women, I've come to know there are some specific things that are really helpful to getting her in the journey herself. So those are the things I would like to talk about today.
Well, good, because we're, as we say in the South, fixing to do that. So, okay. By the way, Randy, our co-host, is here.
I'm quietly sitting in the corner minding my own business.
Yeah.
But I was marveling that, we are thrilled to have Debbie with us again today, and in dealing with her people to make this show happen today. There's just been ongoing negotiations, and I'm just thrilled that we were able to pull it off.
We had to talk to Debbie's agent.
Yes.
to make sure that it was okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
I'm hard to get. Huh?
Yeah, well, the good ones all are. So we're thrilled to have you with us today, Deb.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Aaron is here too, and he is engaged, so he needs to be listening to some of this stuff preventively, I think. Always, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you have a list of things that a woman needs on her journey. So why don't we just jump into that? And the first one you list is to be heard about her pain and loss. You want to start in there?
Well, that maybe sounds like kind of a no-brainer, but the truth is, I think there are a lot of folks that really don't know how to listen well when someone brings a crisis in their life, and particularly I find with Christian women who sometimes seek out Christian friends or pastors on the front end who may quickly get into trying to convince her just to forgive and move on, that we're asked as Christian women to do that. And I think while there is good advice in knowing that that's going to be a part of the journey, the timing of that becomes very important. Right. And I know it's most important for a woman, first of all, to be able to talk about her story and to get help for the pain and the legitimate losses in her life before she begins to think about some of these spiritual requests that we all have to forgive and forget the past. So if you're one of those people who are listening to someone's story for the first time, I just really want to encourage you to slow down any advice to her and to allow her just to be sad and be mad, and to encourage her to get the ongoing help I'm going to talk about here that will help her work through a healing journey.
Yeah, you've heard some horror stories, really, I think, about advice or kind of this black and white, sometimes Christian feedback that some of the wives have received, which I think, to be fair, might be, well-intentioned at some level. But
I would also say that it's not always just Christian feedback for women. I've also heard through my research lately, as well as the many women that I listen to in terms of their stories in our one-on-one counseling sessions, that some of the most unhelpful advice up front was, first and foremost, is to forgive, that's her job to do that immediately. Mm-hmm. Secondly, to try to forget the past. It isn't that big of a deal. She'll get over it. And to think about what's good in terms of moving forward. So it's kind of a Pollyannish kind of response. Another one is to simply tell her to be something better than what she is, because if she could do that, then her husband probably wouldn't have had the need to do what he was doing. So a lot of times that sounds like, go home and be more sexual, be more something, be more submissive, be something more than you are because you're the problem.
Yeah.
And I think I still hear in many situations women who are being advised to divorce and leave.
Right.
And that could be from secular counselors as well as from Christian leaders. Again, I never consider it my job to advise a woman on any kind of direction she might choose to take, but I would certainly want to slow down any kind of reaction that comes from being in an incredible amount of pain,
Right.
so as to know that when it is time to make a decision, it will be the one that is the right fit for her, and she won't live with a lot of resentment. So.
Right. Well, I think what you just said is really important, that in the middle of the early pain and sense of loss, that's not the best time to make any, critical decisions here. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you're saying is that there needs to be a safe community of women around her who are good listeners and not advice givers. Mm-hmm. Would that be true?
That would be true. And when you think about that, that's probably even people other than close sisters, moms, best friends.
Right.
Because those people, while they can, be supportive maybe in the first few hours or week or whatever of something difficult, they're going to be so invested in your own happiness and well-being that oftentimes they do flip into the advice-giving place of wanting you to leave or move away or get out or throw him out or whatever it is, so as to create more, instant happiness and contentment for their loved one. And that makes a lot of sense. But that does lead me to a second point in terms of helping wives, is that for that very reason, I think it's extremely important to look for a professional for herself, ideally a counselor, a professional person in the field who's worked with sexual infidelity, sexual purity issues, addiction, whatever we end up calling this in their case, because that person can hopefully be in a place where, while they do care about a woman and have some experience with what's going to be helpful, they're not so invested that they're just wanting them to get out of this hurtful place immediately and make quick decisions about that. So a one-on-one counselor is always my recommendation, and one that's her own. Yeah. I often see women who begin this journey just simply in couples counseling or going to the same therapist that their husband goes to, and that would not be my suggestion. I think she needs a place of her very own where she can talk about whatever she needs to talk about and be heard there without it necessarily being connected to her husband's story and his support.
Yeah, I think we've also seen situations where a pastor has tried to do the counseling. And there may be pastors out there who are well qualified to do that, but I think even if they are, your point is that the wife needs her own person. The pastor or the counselor needs not to be seen necessarily, both of them.
That would be my recommendation, you're right. And, it's never a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
So that's where we all need to learn to trust our own choices and decisions, and to particularly pay attention to if you do begin with someone and at some point it doesn't feel like the right fit, or you're not feeling heard about something, or you're questioning why maybe some advice is being given out too quickly, that you begin to trust that and know it just may not be the right fit, and to continue to look for someone else. Right. I think that's one of the hard things when we're a person who's struggling with our own problem and we go to a professional of some kind. We can tend to put all of our trust in that person, that, everything they do or say is the right thing. And, I just know that that's not the case. I know for myself, I don't always have the right thing to say to people. And what I want more than anything is for them to begin to trust that, God is within, the Holy Spirit is there. And when they get good at listening to that place, they will know when it's time to either move on to a different relationship or take what fits in terms of what's being said, and to know that they don't have to blindly really trust anyone in this process. And to me, that's the beginning of personal growth for a woman.
Right. To trust herself. And
That's right.
well, let's move on, because you've got.
I know I have a lot of
Yeah,
needs here for a wife.
Yes, I know you do. And
Right.
our show is not as long sometimes as we'd like it to be. But
Welcome to the 3-hour version of the Men of Valor program.
Yeah, right.
Well, another really important, I think, resource for a woman who is going to find healing in this journey is a community of other safe women, ideally women who are working through a similar journey. And again, this is going to be more than a group of good friends or perhaps, women you've been in Bible study with who no one's really talked about issues like this. I'm talking about women who have been through some of the same thing. Ideally, a group where there are women who are further along than all in the same place of crisis, because while it becomes important to have people that understand and can help you in this place and share their wisdom, strength, and hope from their own journey, if you're all at stage 1 of crisis in the first month of, discovery of new information, it's going to be hard for you to be helpful to one another. But there are some great therapy groups out there. I know we lead them here at Faithful and True, which is, I think, one of the greatest strengths we have here. There are great support groups in terms of 12-step groups. There are many new Christian groups that I know for women. Life Ministries, for instance. Life Ministries International is a group we definitely advocate for in terms of places where women can go to find community for themselves. Again, I've worked with many, many women over the years, and what I clearly notice is we can make progress in one-on-one counseling, and we can get a lot of help there, but for the women who find community, I consistently see that progress is much faster, and healing is much deeper, and the transformation in lives is much better. So I'm a huge advocate of finding that community wherever you can. And it might mean, by the way, that you travel a distance to get there.
Yeah.
I think I'm really proud of women that commit to coming to groups here with me that have traveled I think the woman that comes from the furthest is a 3-hour drive to come here. And I know that she has learned how to make use of that time. She's a professional. She has her own career, so she has to somehow make that work in her life. But all those commitments lead to, I think, also her deeper desire to grow and to find healing for herself. And so I know it can be done. There are things to do, but sometimes we have to be willing to sacrifice other things in our life to make that happen.
I would guess that her drive home is probably also a very valuable time processing everything that took place at that meeting.
Yep, you're exactly right, Randy. And, we talk about a lot of things there. A lot of stories are shared. We do a lot of therapeutic speaking, and there are lots of things to process. And when you think about it, for the person who lives 5 minutes away and they jump out of a meeting and then they head home to young ones or their job or whatever, and they don't have time to really process as much, they probably don't get as much out of groups. So there are positive things when we take the next right step, as I always say.
All right. Well, we're going to return back now to the list of things that a wife needs on her journey. We've talked about several things so far. We're going to go on to, for those of you that are perfectionistic note takers, this is number 4. So go ahead.
Well, number 4 on my list is the need to get educated about sexual compulsivity, sexual addiction. It's such an important part to understand the why of behaviors. And of course, that's a big part of any of us that are doing clinical work, is not just to judge behaviors and stop them, but for us to figure out what root causes are there. I know I had the privilege of starting to get educated very quickly when I was invited to Family Week, when you went to treatment for that month.
Right.
And today I really realize what a gift that was, because in my own naive life, I really didn't know anything about addiction, whether it was alcoholism or drug addiction or sex addiction or anything. And so I didn't even have the capacity to understand why behaviors were being driven by other stuff. And having the beginnings of that taught to me at Family Week when I was there through the lectures that I listened to were really helpful in terms of helping me to depersonalize what you had done. And I say that to the women that I'm working with is ideally our healing journey is going to be about not personalizing all of these things that are in fact very personal when all we do is hear about them. And it's very hard on the front end not to make behaviors that someone else has done about us, that we're not enough, we haven't been enough, we're not tall enough, pretty enough, sexy enough, whatever enough. And that is, in fact, probably what creates a lot of the pain on the front end is the way we talk to ourselves about who we believe we are because of what our husbands have done. Education is that piece that can hopefully help us build compassion and empathy along the way, and also some new truths about how we're living life together. So however one can acquire that, there's certainly a lot of books these days that can help educate. I think, again, that's why the counseling process with someone who's trained in this field is especially helpful. And again, working in groups with other people who are also acquiring their own education.
Well, the next one, speaking of information, is a big one. So number 5 is a big one. So.
Number 5 is a big one, and it's about living in truth. And one of the things that I think is hardest for a wife, frankly, is not only the behaviors that she maybe has learned about, but more importantly, that there's been lying and covering up and an inability to know the truth about her spouse for however many years it's been in marriage. And when we don't live with truth, what I know is it can tend to start leading us to feel crazy in our life. And for a wife who hasn't known the truth, not only about sexual acting out, but at that point, she may not know about whatever else has not been truthful in her life. And I know this was true for me. You start questioning everything. When you know there hasn't been truth-telling, you don't even know if when you went on the vacation, you really wanted to go on the vacation, or the gift you bought was really, a meaningful gift. Or, I mean, everything becomes questionable. And that can be extremely painful, which is why I think this addiction, more so than any others, is one of the more difficult ones for a wife to move through. So information about what these secrets have been over the years is incredibly important to lay a groundwork, or as we say, a foundation for beginning to heal. And we do that through a process we call full disclosure. We have a very specific process here of helping lead a couple through offering information from the addict to a spouse, so that she is not led to have to ask questions to find out what she needs to know. I find that a lot of times there are husbands who have led secret lives and who say, you can ask me anything, and I think it's very heartfelt, and they really mean it, that you can ask me anything you want, and I will be truthful with you. And while I love that way of approaching that and that openness, it still is not the most helpful way for a wife to live in truth. And so we lead a couple through a process of him offering information about his whole life from birth to the present. The whole history of sexual development through any associations that began to be made with some acting out behaviors, to relationship growth, to any kind of secrets and infidelity that occurred throughout his lifetime, and certainly with her as well. Full disclosure is usually the beginning of laying a foundation of truth-telling in the relationship. It can be a very difficult and hard time. It can feel very hurtful to her. But what my belief is that it's way more harmful to allow someone to live without the truth. Living without the truth means you consistently are not able to match up your external reality with your internal reality. I think we all have hunches and red flags and intuitive senses about things we see and smell and hear and so forth that if we're not being told the truth, they don't match up. And that's a very crazy making place. So I encourage men who are here getting help with you that one of the greatest gifts they can give to their spouse is full disclosure by offering information.
Yeah, being proactive about it. And we've talked about this before, but we do have a document on our website that is about how to do full disclosure for the process of it. And counselors and therapists can look at that if they want to know how we, in fact, lead a couple through that. So
Right.
we do feel pretty strongly that it's good for that to be guided by people who know what they're doing, because it could easily get out of control if it's not. So, okay, that is huge, and that is foundational. And the next one is too. Really, all of these are incredibly important. But
The next one I talk about is a need for a wife to know that she didn't cause this addiction in her husband, and that she really can't cure it or control it. And I think for many women, they have been blamed by their husbands for why he's doing what he's doing. And while I do know that no marriage is perfect and there are struggles about many things, and there are things that all of us can continue to change to make a marriage better, I know that we are very adamant here about sorting out who's responsible for what
yeah,
if we're going to make progress. And it is true, I believe, that no one can be responsible for choices I make in terms of my own behaviors and how I'm managing my own pain or my own needs in my life. And the same would be true about you or anyone else. So we are asked to be responsible for ourselves. And it's true, we all get in pain at times, and we all don't have what we need at times. But how we respond to that becomes more indicative of our own character and how we're doing in terms of being well ourselves and being whole. So anytime we're trying to blame another person because of something we've chosen to do that doesn't match our journey of faith, I think, is not helpful. And unfortunately, many wives have been in that position where they've been blamed for many years. And I think it's very important for them to hear from someone who has been educated in this field to know that that is not the case, even though they may have heard that it is not the truth.
right,
I know when I've sat with women who have lived with a lot of blame and I tell them this truth, they often weep because they have not heard the truth really from any place in their life. And they've often lived for years and years of the guilt and the shame of believing that they've been responsible for someone else's life choices.
yeah. Well, I think equally important in that statement is that the last part, which is that they didn't cause it, because the addiction, and of course they're getting educated about addiction to know that the addiction preceded their relationship in all likelihood. But I think equally important is that, okay, you didn't cause it, and you can't cure it or you can't control it. Some of the wives, I think, are interested in trying to be helpful and being having helpful suggestions about what the addict needs to do. But that's part of this whole surrender, really, isn't it? That they can't control it.
Yes, and that is an important part you bring up. And I think control does come from a couple of different places. One might be a desire to be helpful.
Yeah.
And another really big place, though, is a place of fear.
Yeah.
I think we get into our controlling nature when we get afraid. And clearly, I think while wives are angry and disappointed and sad and all those things from what has happened, they're also afraid that if there's not the kind of help that's needed to stop these behaviors or change them for the long term, that could mean some very significant changes for them in terms of whether they can live with that or if they need to leave the relationship or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think the fear drives any of us, too, to try to control.
Right.
In fact, just last night in my group, one of the women who's there about a year into recovery and his sobriety began to get very worried because he was skipping a few of his counseling groups with you, actually. And she said, I think I need to be worried about that. And I've been telling him I don't like it and I need him to go and, all this controlling stuff. And, of course, other women who are a little further down began to help her talk through this nature of controlling and whether that was really, really going to make a difference in terms of how his recovery process went. So there again, the power of the group is wonderful, and it's absolutely true that her trying to control what and everything that he does in recovery would in fact be the ticket to a wonderful life ahead.
Yeah.
It's not quite that simple.
Well, there's a lot of couples dynamics to that. And what is most helpful to the husband is for him to be motivated to, control his own program and not to be externally focused on what the wife is going to say or do.
Exactly.
Well, all right.
So moving along.
Yes, we have 4 more to do here.
Okay.
So,
Well, moving along, I love to see women get involved in this process because when we've been really hurt by something, a crisis in our life, adversity of some kind, we have a couple of choices. One is to figure out how to just survive from it. And a lot of people, that's kind of the extent of what they do when things get hard. They get through it somehow, some way for a few months or get distracted by other things in life and eventually move on. But I think for a woman who's willing to start examining her own life and her own patterns and how she shows up in a relationship and what she does when she gets hurt and can begin to learn a lot about who she is as a person. And the recovery process becomes way more than what do I need to watch for to see that my husband's getting well, and what do I need to worry about, and when will the other shoe drop? Those are definitely things we think about and talk a lot about on the beginning part of the journey. But when we have someone who's invested in learning from the journey, we have a wife who's willing to look at way more than that. And these are the things that are going to help her be a different and better and whole person. And what I see consistently with women who are here for a while, year, 2, sometimes 3, is that they begin to hit those places where they really start looking at who they are at a very deep level. So it's a very rich part of the journey, actually, for women who will stay in it and progress to this level of learning for themselves.
it's about their own individual healing.
Right. So I also talk about how, it might be important to think about adding couples counseling. You and I believe in the 3 equal pieces of this journey. One, his for sure, which is about him and finding sobriety and his own community and support and healing. Hers in the same way. And then a we piece for the marriage. And we think all 3 of those are important. So, for a wife who only ever does her individual work but isn't willing to engage in the couples piece, I still think there's a part of her journey that is missed because we need to take what we're learning individually and then bring it to the game, so to speak. It's a little bit like I liken learning tennis. I can practice with my coach and feel like I'm doing great, but if I get into the game, I could fail miserably because that's a whole different scenario. So couples counseling when she's ready is an important piece to bring what she's learning and practice it in the coupleship with help.
Right. So that's what we do kind of this afternoon after we finish the show. We've got 2 couples that we're working with, and we do enjoy doing that because the potential for relationships moving into a more spiritually and emotionally intimate place is quite good. So
The next one is really one of my greatest heart's desires to talk about finding purpose in the pain. In the clinical world, we call that post-traumatic growth. And in the biblical world, we can liken it to any number of scripture verses. James 1:2 is one of my favorite about taking our trials, considering them joyful, which I know is a little bit hard, but looking for how our trials in life lead us to finish the things that are unfinished about ourselves. This is definitely a spiritual journey, I know that, even though it may be labeled as a sex addiction on the front end. It is everything about being a new person in terms of our spiritual growth.
Right.
So finding purpose in the pain can take a while. There's no doubt about it. We don't want to rush to that place of saying, oh, I know, God has much bigger things in your life, and surely you'll be able to use this story of yours in some magnificent way. When a wife is told that in the first week or month of recovery, you just kind of want to do something horrible. But at any rate, I think it is important for any of us working with wives to not keep them traumatized by what's been very hard here and is in fact very painful, but for them to know that with help and with the right resources, there is every belief that this could be about something very transformational in their life. My own research has led me to know that for sure with the hundreds of wives that participated in my study, that the majority of them found this post-traumatic growth, or just as Paul was saying, and James were saying in some of the scripture verses I love, is that we do grow in character. We become stronger individually. We can create richer relationships in our life. Our spiritual life grows. Our priorities change in life. And those are wonderful things that can come out of something very difficult. So I always want to, in an appropriate and timely way, allow a woman to hear that kind of hope that I have for her when she joins in the journey.
Well, that there will be a richer personal, spiritual, emotional, relational life if they stay, in this journey. And I was thinking as you were talking about this, because I know this is one of your, main passions, and that we could probably easily do a whole show just on this one particular point. But you talked there at the end of that point about what is really the final point, about hope. So,
yeah, for today at least, one of my final points about what women need is sometimes someone to hold hope for her.
right.
Because it's hard to introduce all of these ideas and the support she might need, and it's all you can do to get from one day to the next, usually when you've been hit with a lot of new information. But I remind them, too, there are those of us who can hold hope for them. And I do like holding hope for women because I truly have it for them. I know that life won't always look this hard and feel this hopeless. And so I think it's important for someone to be there for her to hold that hope. And if that's in the community of women she's finding, or in the therapist she goes to,
Or both. Yeah.
or both,
Yeah.
that's one of the great things we can offer on the front end.
Well, I think one of the great things that God has led us into in our ministry is that your groups are led by yourself and other wives that have lived this journey and found the hope and come out the other end. And our couples workshop and your wives workshop is led pretty much exclusively by women who have been on this journey and can hold the hope or represent the hope, or it gives you a kind of an instant credibility with the women to know that you're not just some therapist coming after this. You're a wife who has done her own work, really.
Well, thanks for saying that, and I think that is true. That it's helpful to know that someone gets it, really at a very deep level, and is also thriving. I think that becomes very important to other women, that myself and the other leaders, we're not just surviving something hard and making do, and we still have all of these war scars, so to speak, but that actually we're thriving women, and we admit that we wouldn't be who we are today doing what we did had we not gone through this.
Right.
And so while we don't have to be jumping through hoops saying, I'm so grateful my husband had an addiction,
Right.
it could be a both and, as we say. If something very hard came into our lives, we were able to have wonderful resources that helped us heal and become whole and really transform who we are as women, and that it's been a very good thing. And it doesn't mean it hasn't been distressful and that we haven't had a lot of hard days. And the Lord has blessed us with the journey of the trial. So.
Right.
Thank you for joining us on the Faithful and True podcast today. We hope that this Legacy podcast has been beneficial and meaningful to you. We hope that this coming week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.